Hello, my name is Jacob Rowan, and I've created this video to answer a question I think many people have asked at some point or another when visiting a gallery or museum. I know I've certainly asked it many times. How can this and this be art? As an example, I would like to use this sculpture of The Thinker by Rodin and Duchamp's infamous urinal. Rodin is clearly demonstrating an incredible technical ability developed over years of training. All Duchamp did was place a urinal in the gallery, right? If one of these is art, how can the other also fit into the same category? The answer is framing. And no, I'm not talking about the overpriced products you find at Michael's. I'm talking about context. To frame is to establish some kind of territory. Framing is what makes art possible and defines how we interact with it. To explain what I mean, we need to first zoom out a little and examine the concept of framing in the broader context of our everyday experience. One of our first instincts as humans is to establish territory. We say, this area is for eating, and this area is for sleeping, and this area is for doing our business. We say, this goes here, and that goes there. We do this in specific rooms. We have bedrooms, bathrooms, living rooms, dining rooms, and so on. And we do this increasingly outward into counties, states, regions, countries. We establish a territory by framing it. A frame can be a physical structure, like a wall or a house, or it can be imaginary, like the lines on this map. The lines are still a frame because they are mutually agreed upon. And that's the key point there. A frame has to be mutually agreed upon in some way. Unless it's like architecture, that's a physical frame that acts as a barrier between our territory and the outside chaos. However, most frames are some mix of physical and imaginary. So, why make these territories? To quote Elizabeth Gross, territory is a provisional ordering of chaos through the laying down of a grid or order that entraps chaotic shards to arrest or slow them into a space and time, a structure and a form where they can affect and be affected by bodies. In other words, territory transforms things so they can affect us or we can affect them. Let's use sports as an example. A tennis court or a soccer field is a simple frame. Someone has framed the earth physically by making a totally level area, and conceptually by drawing lines and establishing goals and borders. This frame allows bodies to affect and be affected. The game is only possible because of the frame. Let's start moving our way back towards art. What is this? With no frame, I can't be sure. It's just a random object until someone tells me it's plumbing hardware. And even then, without understanding the framework of plumbing, I don't know how to approach this object, understand its purpose, or get why it's worth anything. Speaking of art and plumbing, let's return to the original question. A century ago, Marcel Duchamp, in an infamous move, signed a urinal and placed it in an art gallery. In so doing, he called attention to the fact that the frame we call art is arbitrary. If an artist calls something art, and enough people agree, for example, a gallery shows it, then it is art. The traditional disciplines of painting and sculpture are simply one frame, and Duchamp wanted to break that frame and establish a new one. He was much more interested in a conceptual art based on ideas, rather than what he called retinal art, which was more about visual experience. As a quick side note, calling something art is not a qualitative statement. If I order a steak at Waffle House, I can't complain that it's not a steak just because I don't like it. Art can be good or bad, but it's still art. Art is an arbitrary, though mutually agreed upon, label that is subject to change. Calling something art is not a value judgment, it is simply a frame for knowing how to approach a certain object or experience. So, whether or not you like Duchamp's urinal, he was successful in redefining how people view art. He gave them a different frame to look through. Seeing this object in a gallery, the side of the street, a hardware store, all drastically change what you think when you see it. The framework known as art changes how we approach something. An artist can encourage us to think along certain lines by simply putting something unusual in the gallery, causing us to look more carefully at our everyday life. A contemporary example of this is James Turrell's Skyscapes. He uses the art space of a museum to reframe something we see every day, the sky. By changing the context of our experience, he encourages us to see it in a new way. I think artists are so interested in the frame because it is the frame that makes art possible. Here's another quote from Elizabeth Gross. Without territory, framing, there may be objects or things, but not qualities that can become expressive, that can intensify and transform living bodies. Territory frames chaos provisionally, and in the process produces extractable qualities which become the materials and formal structures of art. In other words, without having a mental concept or frame for art, art would not exist. As we near the end of this video, I'd like to leave you with a concept that has helped me wrap my head around all this. In traditional Japanese homes, there is a small alcove specifically dedicated to art. This frame is known as a tokonoma. This space is only used to display art. Art exists very broadly in two kinds of categories or frames. The first is something like this tokonoma, a space universally understood within a certain culture as a place for art, like a gallery or a museum. The second is the unexpected areas of our everyday. What happens when the everyday is placed in this dedicated art space? What happens when the intention and creativity of art is exercised in the everyday life? How can the territories of art and life be shifted, realigned, or merged? So, the next time you see a work of art you don't understand, like this Erased de Kooning by Rauschenberg, ask yourself, what frame is the artist operating within or breaking out of? Artists today are working with a very different context and set of questions than those of the Renaissance or even the 1900s. I'm not saying you'll necessarily enjoy the art more for having asked this question, but at least you'll understand it better without feeling like the artist is scamming you in some way. Personally, I think this change is very exciting. You couldn't have art like these salt labyrinths within that old frame. As the frame changes, so does what is possible. If you found any of this at all interesting, I would suggest you check out Andrea Zitel's video, Dynamic Essay About the Panel, or if you have even more time, Catherine McBride's video, Framing First Draft. Both can be found on Vimeo. The two quotes in this video came from the book Chaos, Territory, Art, Deluge and the Framing of the Earth by Elizabeth Gross. I hope this video has been helpful in your experience and enjoyment of art.